Okay, so folks, what we are going to do, what we're going to do now is we're going to start learning the work from the Arizal called Sha'ar haGilgulim. Let me just show you. Oops, wrong thing over here. Apologies. Um, there are 8 Sha'arim, what are called 8 gates, 8 gates of the teachings of the Arizal. Now, let me just explain something a little bit unusual about these 8 gates. First of all, they're very authoritative. Um, the Arizal himself, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the 15th century, 1500, 16th century Kabbalist, what he was called the father of modern Kabbalah, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria did not do a lot of writing himself. Most of his writing was written down actually by his student. And the main student that wrote things down was Rabbi Chaim Vital. The Arizal passed away at a very young age. He was only 39 when he passed away. And his disciple, Rabbi Chaim Vital, held on to all the writings and all the teachings, and he collated them and he ordered them and so on and so forth. But when he passed away, before he passed away, he ordered that all the writings, that everything he had written down, be buried with him. And so it was. His son, Rabbi Shmuel Vital, had a dream one night, and in his dream, his father came to him and said, exhume the following writings from my grave and edit them and publish them, which he did. Not everything was removed from the grave. Some of them remained there, but these 8 gates are some of the writings that were actually removed from the grave and then re-edited and eventually published by Rabbi Shmuel Vital. They have to be they are very authoritative, and they have to be treated with a tremendous amount of respect. The 8 gates are named as follows, and I'll explain a little bit more about the concept of each gate shortly. But one thing I want to explain first is the whole concept of a gate. What do we mean by a gate? When it comes to Kabbalistic literature, and particularly the writings of Arizal, a gate means an entryway into a portal or an entryway into a higher level of spirituality, or if you like, a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of awareness. Each of these gates, obviously, if there are 8 gates, there are 8 different paths which the gates open into. All of them are equally valid, but not every path is right for every soul. Now, there are those that do much better, understanding the structure of the world. The structure of the world is generally treated in this first Sha'ar, in this first gate called Sha'ar HaKadamot, the gate of introduction, the introductory gate. In other words, that's where he lays out the whole system of how the worlds operate and much more as well. He talks about the psyche and the soul and so on and so forth, but primarily it's the whole concept of creation and how it came about and where it started from the Orient Sof and so on and so forth, the concept of Tzimtzum. There are many, many concepts which are very vital to the understanding of the Arizal's teachings. Now, that's Sha'ar HaKadamot. Sha'ar Mamor Rashbi is a work that discusses and explains the writings and teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar. So he takes certain passages, not everything, but he takes certain passages and explains them in depth. And that actually is I suppose you could say, the fundamentals of the system of Kabbalah, what came from the Zohar. There is another gate, the third gate, called Sha'ar Ma'amorei Chazal, the gate of the teachings of the sages, or the statements of the sages. And these are certain statements from the Talmud, which the Arizal then goes on to explain the inner dimensions of what apparently are only outer dimensional concepts. Sha'ar HaPsukim, the gate of verses, discusses verses from the 5 books of Moses, from Chamisha Chumsha Torah, plus Tanakh, the rest of Tanakh, the rest of Nach, all the rest of the writings of the prophets and so on, called Nach, Nevi'im and Ketuvim, the writings of the prophets and the writings, for example, Psalms and Song of Songs. Those are part of the writings, so to speak. Sha'ar Mitzvot discusses the various commandments that are obligatory upon the Jewish people. Many of them today are in abeyance, so to speak, at least on the physical plane, because we do not have the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. Since we don't have a temple, many of the mitzvot cannot be performed. Many of them have to do with the sacrifices, with work, with the avodah, with the service in the temple, and so on and so forth. Many of them, but the ones that are, the Arizal explains, as well as some of the ones that are not extant. Sha'ar HaKavanot is the gate that deals with intentions in prayer and in meditation, special intentions, or you could call them simply meditations. The kavanah means to direct the mind towards something. Lechaven means to direct towards. So lechaven is not only having something in mind, but directing the mind towards something else. Sha'ar HaKodesh is the gate of divine inspiration, and that is also a very interesting gate, which we will have a look at. But Sha'ar haGilgulim is the one we're going to be sharing, the one we're going to be starting with, because a lot of the fundamentals that are necessary to understand Sha'ar HaKodesh are actually in Sha'ar haGilgulim and not in Sha'ar HaKodesh, and therefore they would be very difficult to understand without first learning Sha'ar haGilgulim. Now, what are Gilgulim? Gilgulim are essentially the concept of reincarnations. Now, prior to the revelation of the Zohar was only actually revealed in the 1300s. Prior to the revelation of the Zohar, the whole concept of Gilgul reincarnation was not understood, and it did not seem to be part of Jewish teachings at all. However, that is actually incorrect. It is definitely part of Jewish teachings. And let me just see, excuse me a minute. I just want to see if there's some people that didn't get into the room. Just hang on a second. Looks to me like the people that didn't get in. Where are we here? Three people in the waiting room. Hey, this is a nuisance. Okay, sorry folks. I have to try and figure out how to get them in now. Yeah, here we are. Yeah, admit all. There we go. Admit all. Okay. Admit all. All right. A little more volume would be nice. Yeah, I don't really know how to adjust this thing. You know what? Here, maybe that'll do the trick. Let me come a bit closer to the microphone. That'll be easier to. Okay. I think we could go back now to our discussion. All right. So we discussed therefore the Sha'ar haGilgulim. Now we're actually going to look at one of the. We're going to look at one of the copies of Sha'ar haGilgulim. In other words, we're actually going to new share, and I want to show you the Sha'ar haGilgulim. Let's see where it is now. Something disappeared. Sorry, folks, this is not my field of expertise. I'll tell you the truth. Computer stuff is not my field of expertise, but oh no, I don't know where it is even now. Nope. Well, here it is. But I don't know if we can actually access it. My apologies, folks. Again, this is not my computer. I'm not so used to it, so I'm not 100% sure as to what to do all the time. But here we are. I'm hoping that you share. Yes, there we go. Okay, you share. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, anyone who can read Hebrew, you can see that this is Sha'ar haGilgulim. Now I have to re-record. So I paused the recording, I didn't, so that all came out on. Oh well, I'll have to edit it afterwards. Okay, so this is Sha'ar haGilgulim, the first chapter, and he begins with by prefacing an explanation with the preface, the first introduction, or the first preface. And he says as follows: let's begin with what the sages told us. There are 5 names for the soul. There are 5 names for the nefesh. Nefesh is one of the names of the soul. It is usually, as we will see shortly, the name of the lowest level of soul, the level of consciousness of the physical. And this is the order of the levels of soul from below to above. In other words, from the lowest to the highest. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida. Nefesh is the lowest level, then Ruach, then Neshama, then Chaya, and Yechida. Now I'm going to share another screen, you share, and I want to show you another concept here, which just 2D. Sorry, folks. Untitled document. Yeah, I hope that's good. That's new share, untitled document. There you go. Share. I should have someone else doing this. Okay. Here, as you see, are the levels of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and then Chaya and Yechida. Right? Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. Now, I explained them a little bit over here. I numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is the lowest, not the highest. 5 is the lowest, and the lowest 3 are imminent levels of consciousness. I call them consciousness rather than soul here because it's a word that we're more familiar with, and we can figure it out from there. Let me just see here. There are a couple of questions here. I will address the question shortly. 13th gate, we'll talk about that another time. Yeah, Wendy's in the waiting room. All right. You still see the first Google Doc. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to get someone else to do this. I don't know who exactly, but we'll work on it. All right, in any event, the lowest levels of consciousness, the 3 lower levels of consciousness are called Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama in that order. Nefesh, and then Ruach and Neshama. Nefesh is what? That's physical consciousness, consciousness of the physical thing. In other words, consciousness of your own body and your own physical powers, including sight, and hearing, and taste, and smell, and so on and so forth. That's all the level of Nefesh. The next level up, the higher level is called Ruach. That's emotional consciousness. These correspond, in fact, to the Sfirot. The Nefesh corresponds to the level of Malchut. Ruach corresponds to the 6 Sfirot of what's called Zeir Anpin, Chesed, Gvurat, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. That's called Ruach. Those levels of Zeir Anpin, those Sfirot. But it's emotional, essentially emotional concept. Chesed is kindness, Gvura, harshness, severity, etc., etc. And there's many classes on that I taught previously. I'm sure most of you are familiar with these concepts. Then there is neshama, or intellectual consciousness. In other words, this is consciousness of concept. It's conceptual consciousness of a higher order than emotional consciousness, because concepts transcend emotions. Concepts could be forever, whereas notions are generally really are generally fleeting, rather than they rarely last very long. But intellectual ideas, principles, um, themes, theories, ideas, those could last really forever. So anyway, these are the imminent levels of consciousness. And then we get to the two highest levels of consciousness called Chaya and the highest level Yechida. Chaya is essentially consciousness of purpose. And Yechida is essentially God consciousness. Now, the Zohar, when the Zohar addresses these two levels of Chaya and Yechida, the Zohar simply calls them Neshama le-Neshama, the soul of the soul, or the Neshama of the Neshama, the soul of the soul. Why? Because these two, since they are transcendent, it's very hard to actually distinguish them clearly, one from the other, when one is operating and the other is not operating. Really, both of them are operating at the same time, but Yechida is far more hidden than Chaya. Chaya, consciousness of purpose, and that is manifested in a person's will. Yechida is God consciousness, and that is the essence of the soul, God consciousness, the essence of the soul, which is this God consciousness is buried in, or buried within, or inherent within the highest level of the soul. And that's why it's called Yechida, Yechida meaning oneness, right? It's one with God, essentially. Since the object of consciousness and the consciousness essentially become one thing, therefore, Yechida is, it expresses that oneness. Whereas Chaya means actually life, essential life. It's the idea of, let's see, screen share again. Probably didn't get a lot of what all right, this is, there it is, there it all is. My apologies for, I think I wasn't screen sharing at the time, but yeah, manifestation is possible, yes. Justin, sorry about that. Yeah, now I'm realizing. Waiting room participants, people come late, then they can't get in. Okay, that's what happens when you come late. I'm gonna tell you, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. All right. So the all kinds of things are going on over here, and they're not exactly what I was planning on. There is a lot happening that I'm not quite all right. This is gonna have to be edited, this recording, so whatever. Okay, so let's get back now to our document, which is the document, the most important document, the document of the actual teaching of the actual teachings of the Arizal. And to get back to that document, I have to find a whole new thing over here. Disaster. Okay, here we go. I hope this will. Can you see the Hebrew document, everybody? If you wouldn't mind just texting me to. Again, my apologies about this because no, you don't see it. All right, here we go. Share. Okay. So much easier on my computer when I had two windows, two screens. All right, it is what it is. What can you do? This is what I have to use for the time being. My computer's out of commission. All right, so again, he said we're going to explain that there are 5 names for the soul. Whenever the Talmud or the Midrash, this is actually a midrashic statement, a statement from the Midrash. There are several approaches to explaining scripture. There's the plain, straightforward meaning of the text, and then there's what's called Midrash. Midrash hints at somewhat deeper understandings, and this particular concept of the 5 names of the soul, these are 5 names of the soul that are found throughout scripture. The 5 names of the soul are called different names because they exhibit different qualities. as we just explained. The 5 levels of the soul, or 5 levels of consciousness, and there are 5 of them because it's not all the same thing. Even though generally we refer to the soul as the nefesh, nevertheless, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida are different things. They're different levels of consciousness, different levels of awareness, different objects of consciousness are attached to that particular level of soul. And we just went through the levels, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. Now, he says like this. There's no question at all that the names of the souls are not just by happenstance or for convenience. Rather, as he will go on to explain, they are indicative of levels of consciousness and certain things that we can tap into if we know the method, the methodology, and the right approach, and to have the right intentions when we're attempting to tap into that level of soul. So this is what he goes on to explain now. There's no doubt. They were not given just by chance. Omnam da, no rather. Omnam da, no rather. Ki Adam Atzmoy, that the person himself, who haruchnius asher b'toch haguf, is the spirituality that's enclosed within the body. The person himself is the spirituality that's enclosed within the body. In other words, the body is sort of the outer shell, whereas the inner dimension, the inner phases of life, or the inner phases of consciousness, are the main aspect of a person. So that's what he says. Who haruchni is asher b'toch haguf. This is the spirituality that's enclosed in the body. But as I mentioned before, the spirituality that's enclosed in the body is only the lowest 3 levels of consciousness, the lowest 3 levels of spirituality, the lowest 3 levels of soul, not the higher levels called chaya and yechida. V'haguf, the physical body, hu levush ha'adam, is the garment of the person. It's not the identity of the person. The person's identity is his soul, and essentially his highest level of soul, yechida, which is in fact not even enclosed in the body. It's transcendent. It transcends the physical world. But the guf itself is not the person himself or herself. As as scripture says, Al basa Adam lo yisach. You should not anoint the flesh of a person, but what we're gleaning from this verse is that the person and his flesh are 2 different things. The Adam is his consciousness, his soul, and his basar, his flesh, his body, is not his soul, is not him. That's not who he is. He's not the person. That's just simply a garment in which the levels of consciousness, the 3 lower levels of consciousness, are clothed. Zohar, as is explained in the Zohar, Parashat Bereshit, as explained in Bereshit Genesis, page 20b. Okay. He now goes on to explain something that I'm actually going to discuss in much greater detail next week and in the next class. That is how the 4 levels of soul, 5 levels of soul essentially, correspond to the 4 worlds which we know about, and the transcendent world. But I'll just read it through now, and then we'll discuss it much more next week. V'noida, as is known, ki Adam mekasher kol dalad. Man is attached to all of the 4 worlds of Atzilut, that's the highest world, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And the 4 lowest levels of consciousness correspond to that. Chaya corresponds to the world of Atzilut, Neshama to the world of Bria, Ruach to the world of Yetzira, and Nefesh to the world of Asiya, the lowest of these 4 worlds. And again, there is a transcendent world called Adam Kadmon. And we'll discuss that more next week. Therefore, it's necessary. It's necessary that there will be parts of all of the worlds invested in the soul or attached to the soul, so to speak. In other words, the objects of consciousness of each soul will be that level of world. And those parts, each part of them, and each part, in other words, each part attaching to each world, each part of consciousness, each level of consciousness, attaching to each of the worlds, is what we discussed earlier, the Naran Chai Nefesh Neshama Chai Yechida, as we will explain next time around. Now, I probably didn't mention this to you, and I probably should stop the recording for now, just to explain something. Stop share, more.